It was one of those scorching Texas summer evenings. Dust, carried by the dry wind all day, seeped through the windows, settling in a thin layer on the kitchen's wooden floor. I stood by the old coffee maker, as was my habit. That machine had been my companion for years. Every morning and evening, the familiar coffee aroma filled the heart of the house. Just then, the door slammed open. My son Stephen stormed in. His face bore a harsh expression, foreign to me. His brows were furrowed, lips tight. He stopped when he saw me, but his eyes held neither love nor warmth. "Mom," he said, his voice devoid of the warmth I knew. "We don't need you anymore. You need to leave." In that moment, my heart seemed to stop. The world fell silent, only the coffee maker's ticking could be heard. His words cut through my soul like a knife. I had devoted my life to him. I worked night shifts until my fingers bled, saved every penny, dreamed of his future. I sacrificed myself for him to be happy, strong, successful. And now, this was my reward? "This is my home," I said, trying to keep my voice from trembling. My words were short, but the storm inside me was vast. Stephen looked away, leaning toward the woman in his shadow, his wife, Karen. She stood with her arms crossed, a faint, cold smile on her face, like someone who'd won a victory. "This house is ours now, Mom," Stephen said, his voice low but resolute. Karen jumped in. "You'd be more comfortable somewhere else. There's no place for young people here. You need to find your own peace." "My peace?" The word felt like bitter mockery coming from her. I hadn't known peace for years. After my husband David's death, my only peace was keeping Stephen afloat. He was just 16 when we lost David. I didn't even allow myself to grieve. I buried my pain to protect his dreams. I worked days at the factory, nights at extra jobs. I gave my hands, my back, my health so he could attend music school, carve his own path. And now, he was telling me to leave my own home. Every corner of the house was filled with memories. It was an old farmhouse outside Austin, shaded by pine trees. David and I bought it in 1980. The walls were worn, the porch faded by the sun, but it was always a home. Stephen grew up here. As a child, he played soccer in the backyard, strummed his guitar on the porch at dusk. I remembered those moments like yesterday, his laughter, his running, David's patient advice. It was all etched into the stones of this house. But when Karen came, everything changed. She treated the place like her personal mansion. She tore down my curtains, boxed up family photos, tossed aside the blanket I'd knitted over years. Bit by bit, she took this house from me. I stayed silent because family meant patience. Even as a stranger in my own home, I kept quiet for Stephen's happiness. But those words, "You need to leave," were the final drop. Something broke inside me. It was so deep that neither tears nor anger came. Only a profound silence enveloped my soul. In that moment, I realized I was no longer just a mother or grandmother. I was becoming something else, something stronger. Stephen didn't know it yet. Karen looked into my eyes with a condescending smirk. Maybe she thought she'd won. But she didn't know that some victories don't last as long as they seem. My silence wasn't weakness, as she assumed, it was the deep breath before a storm. That evening, sitting on the porch, Stephen's words echoed in my ears. "We don't need you anymore." That sentence wasn't just rejection, it was the dismissal of years of sacrifice. I'd given my youth, worked through nights at the factory, endured pain in my back and hands to build his future. And now, my reward was estrangement. But I didn't cry. I breathed deeply and looked at the sky. Texas's red evening faded slowly on the horizon. The crickets' chirps seemed to whisper my loneliness. On the porch, I sat in the old wooden swing, my companion for years. The wood creaked softly. My hand reached reflexively to the side table's drawer. I pulled out a dusty, long unopened box. It held more than just photos and small keepsakes. Inside was the letter David wrote before he died. As I took the yellowed, worn paper in my hands, my heart raced. Seeing his handwriting, my eyes welled up. It was one of his last words, written with trembling hands. Eleanor, if you trust your family too much, be careful. People can change over time. But remember, you have a legacy greater than this house. What keeps you standing isn't just memories. I hadn't fully grasped the weight of those words for years. But that night, Stephen's cold expression and Karen's smug smile brought it all back. Even if I was kicked out of this house, I hadn't lost anything. David had left me something else. He'd spoken of land inherited from his grandfather, outside Austin. We'd visited it often as children. A 50-acre plot filled with wildflowers, shaded by massive oak trees, a quiet, green paradise far from the city back then. The deed had been transferred to my name years ago by David. Stephen and Karen knew nothing of it. But I never forgot. Now, Austin had grown. Skyscrapers, malls, and luxury estates had swallowed the city's edges. That land, once filled only with children's laughter and the wind's hum, was now worth millions, a hidden gem. The next morning, I woke early. I saw the dark circles under my eyes in the mirror but didn't care. I called a taxi and headed to town. A strange peace filled me, as if I was remembering my true strength for the first time. I went to the office of David's old friend, lawyer Thomas. The years had aged him, graying his hair, but his eyes still radiated trust. "Eleanor," he said, hugging me tightly, "it's good to see you. What's going on?" I pulled the letter and deed from the box and placed them on his desk. Thomas examined them carefully. A slight smile of surprise crossed his face. "I didn't know you still held on to this land," he said. "You can't imagine its value now. The city's practically reached it. Developers are fighting over this area." A moment of silence passed. As I watched his astonishment, a faint smile crept onto my lips. "So, what can I do?" I asked. Thomas laced his fingers together and listed the options. "You can sell it, make enough to live comfortably for life. You can lease it for a steady income. Or, you can develop it yourself. The land's future is in your hands. But first," he said, lowering his voice, "we need to talk about the house. Eleanor, that farmhouse is yours. The deed is in your name. Neither Stephen nor Karen can kick you out." His words echoed in my heart. The helplessness that had weighed on me for years began to lift. I suddenly realized Stephen's "we don't need you anymore" was just a beginning. Because I held a power they could never imagine. In that moment, a plan sprouted in my mind. My silence wasn't weakness. It was the harbinger of a coming storm. And I would create that storm with my own hands. The next day, Stephen and Karen acted as if nothing had happened. As if the cold words they'd stabbed into my heart the day before never existed. Karen was in the kitchen, placing a shiny new blender on the counter, laughing loudly. "Look, Stephen, this model has 3 different blades. Smoothies, soups, even crushes ice. This house is going to be modern now." My old kettle, carefully used for years and carrying memories, was pushed aside with one motion, like a small pot dragged to the counter's edge. My heart ached. That kettle had made countless breakfasts for David. Every morning began with its warm steam and brown porcelain mugs. Now, those memories were fading under the shadow of Karen's gleaming appliances. My grandchildren, Mia and Lucas, were glued to the gaming console in the living room. The screen's blue light reflected on their faces, their laughter echoing in the room's corners. Watching them, I drifted back to old days. I remembered Stephen at their age, the same passion for games, the same excitement. But back then, there was no TV. He'd run in the backyard, play soccer in the mud, come home at dusk with scratches and scraped knees but eyes sparkling. Now, Stephen sprawled on the couch, buried in his phone. His finger scrolled the screen, his face showing neither a smile nor a glance my way. The indifference, dismissing years of effort, knotted inside me. Karen raised her voice. "Eleanor, make something light for dinner tonight, okay?" The kids shouldn't eat heavy food late. A salad, maybe some chicken. As if I were their cook. As if my only role in this house was to fill their stomachs. I bit my lip, smiled, nodded. I silenced the anger rising within me with the patience of years. At dinner, when the table was set, Karen sat like a general who'd won a victory. She talked to the kids about their new school schedules, to Stephen about new house ideas. "You know, Stephen," she said, her lips curling slyly, "we could sell this house and move to a bigger place. Closer to downtown, a modern villa. Maybe with a pool for the kids." Stephen nodded, setting his phone aside. But he didn't look at me. Their words floated in the air as if I weren't there. I asked, trying to drown out the clinking of forks. "Whose house is this?" My voice was calm, but the tremor inside me resonated even in the plates on the table. Karen laughed, a condescending, impatient laugh. "Of course it's ours, Eleanor. Don't worry, we'll find you a nice place. Somewhere you'll be comfortable. Maybe a small apartment. You'll have neighbors, you won't be bored." My eyes turned to Stephen. He avoided my gaze. Karen's words nailed themselves to the table. A nice place for me, as if my entire life were a suitcase, light enough for them to tuck away wherever they wanted. In that moment, I understood. In their eyes, I was no longer a mother or grandmother, just a burden. Years of effort, love, and sacrifice had been reduced to a single, "You'll be comfortable," sentence. But I didn't cry. Something else was rising inside me. Silent but powerful. Because I held a card they didn't know about. When everyone went to bed that night, I retreated to my room. The chill from the table still lingered in my palms. I picked up my phone and dialed Thomas's number. I apologized for disturbing his sleep, but my voice was resolute. "Thomas, find out the value of the land. And check the deed to the house. No one can kick me out of my home." In that moment, a spark ignited in my heart. Silence wasn't weakness. Silence was the herald of a storm about to break. For a week, everything seemed quiet on the surface, but the storm inside me grew with each passing day. Stephen and Karen still ruled the house, ignoring my presence as they built their own order. But I was no longer living in their shadow, I was silently weaving my plan. My phone rang early one morning. It was Thomas. His voice was serious, tinged with subtle excitement. "Eleanor," he said, "we didn't even need an auction. I got 3 offers for the land. The highest. $2.5 million. For a moment, my coffee mug trembled in my hand. 2.5 million. That number wasn't just money to me. It was a symbol of my ignored efforts, my tears, my sacrifices over the years. The 50 acres inherited from David's grandfather, once a forgotten plot of land, now sat in the heart of the city's new skyscraper projects and shopping centers. My silent legacy had become a fortune. "Sell it," I said, my voice resolute. "But first, clarify the situation with the house." Thomas paused, then said he'd checked the files. "Eleanor, the house deed is entirely in your name. Neither Stephen nor Karen has any claim. No one can force you out." A deep relief washed over me. The invisible chains I'd carried for years were unraveling. Stephen and Karen's game of "we own the house" held no weight on paper. That afternoon, I went downtown. I met Diane, one of Austin's top realtors, in her modern glass-walled office, where the air smelled of coffee and perfume. "Eleanor, welcome," she said, shaking my hand. Her face held a professional yet reassuring expression. "I want to sell the house," I said directly. Diane looked into my eyes, then tilted her head. "You've lived in that house for years. Are you sure? These decisions aren't easy." "I'm sure," I said without hesitation. "We need to move fast." As Diane took notes, I thought of the pine trees visible from the porch. I remembered the day David and I moved into that house. Its worn walls and creaky stairs had carried our dreams. But now, it was no longer a home, it was a space invaded by strangers who fed on my memories. That evening, I returned home. Stephen met me at the door, his face impatient. "Mom, we still haven't talked," he said. "I'm serious, you need to move out." Karen appeared beside him, arms crossed, a condescending smirk on her lips. "Eleanor, this is best for you and us. Look, you're getting older. You'll be more comfortable elsewhere. We're building a new life here. Don't be selfish." Selfish. That word pierced my heart like ice. I had set aside my desires, my dreams, my comfort for years. I worked night shifts for Stephen, ignored my own needs to pay for his music school. Every brick in that house bore my labor. And now, they called me selfish. I took a deep breath, forcing a calm expression. "Who's selfish, Karen?" I said, my voice sharp as ice. "Me, or you who claim someone else's efforts and try to kick them out?" Stephen bowed his head, avoiding my gaze. Karen let out a mocking laugh, but this time she couldn't hide her tension. The tremble at the corner of her mouth showed my words had struck deep. "What are you saying, Mom?" Stephen said, his voice cracking. I looked at them for a long moment, my son, to whom I'd given my years, and my daughter-in-law, who treated my home like her throne. "This house is mine," I said finally. My words were heavy, unchangeable. "And you are just guests here." Stephen's eyes widened. Karen's mocking smile froze. Silence spread through the house. In that moment, the balance of power shifted. As I walked to my room, my heart was calm but resolute. They didn't know one thing: I was no longer a woman clinging to past pains. I was someone holding the power of a legacy. And soon, they would understand what that meant. Diane moved quickly and professionally. She photographed the house, arranging the garden lights to glow in the evening sun, highlighting the begonia pots on the porch. "This is a home, Eleanor. People want to feel that," she said. She was right. This house had been the witness to my joys and sorrows for years. Though Stephen and Karen saw it as their kingdom, its walls still held David's laughter, the scent of childhood, my patient hands. 5 days after the listing, my phone started ringing. The first offer came from a developer. A cold, numbers-driven voice: "We'd tear it down for apartments." As if they wanted to crush my past with concrete. The second was from a young newlywed couple, their voices full of excitement but their budget weak. The third was from a middle-aged investor, purely profit-driven. Then Clara called. A retired teacher, her voice carried restless hope. "I'm looking for a fresh start," she said. Something stirred in me. Perhaps this house could give someone else a second chance, just as it had carried my memories. I chose Clara. Diane prepared the documents swiftly. "Her offer is cash, it'll be quick," she said. As I signed the papers, my hand didn't tremble. The freedom I'd waited for years flowed like the ink from my pen. Diane looked at me. "Eleanor, this will change your life." I smiled faintly. "My life's already changed," I said. When the sale was complete, I felt a weight lift from my heart. That night, I retreated to a hotel room. Austin's lights filtered through the window, shadows dancing on the walls. Holding a cup of tea, I listened to the silence. So this was freedom. No Stephen's commanding voice, no Karen's condescending looks. Just me. Me and my decisions. An hour later, my phone rang. "Stephen." I didn't answer. Then Karen called, leaving a voicemail. "Eleanor, how could you do this? This is our home." Her voice was full of anger and panic. But it wasn't. That house belonged to me, to David's labor, my years, our memories. They were just passing guests. I looked at the $2.5 million in my bank account. Cold numbers, but behind them was the door to a new life. I'd lived in others' shadows for years. Now I was finding my own light. I pictured Stephen's angry but helpless face, Karen's trembling, condescending smirk. They were probably scrambling to pack, panicking. The kids, Mia and Lucas, likely confused by it all. There was a pang of sadness in me, but it wasn't mixed with regret. I was no longer carrying their burdens. The phone rang again. I silenced it. I didn't want to hear their panic, their anger, their accusations. Their emotions were no longer my problem. Looking out the hotel window, I saw life flowing below, people laughing, cars honking, a street musician playing guitar on a corner. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. Rain draped Austin's streets like a gray curtain. In my hotel room, wiping the fog from the window, I heard a firm knock at the door. A familiar feeling stirred in me, as if this was the final test of a heart long burdened. Opening the door, I saw Stephen. Water dripped from his hair, his jacket weighed down by the rain. His eyes were red, he hadn't slept or had been crying. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking. His lips trembled, his gaze avoided mine. "Please, you sold the house." "Why?" "The kids, where will they live?" I looked at him silently for a moment. The sound of rain amplified the silence between us. Finally, I spoke slowly. "You kicked me out of my home, Stephen. You made me feel like a stranger in my own house. Like I was a shadow, a burden. Now, that house isn't yours. It never was." Stephen's face twisted with pain. He bowed his head, mumbling without lifting his eyes from the floor, "We're sorry. Karen and we made a mistake." For a moment, a pang pierced me. He was still my son. But his apology was like a late traveler chasing a train already gone. I remembered his shouting, his dismissive looks, his claiming of what was mine. That train had left. "Mistakes, Stephen," I said, my voice firm but calm, "come with consequences. And this consequence is you finding your own way." I closed the door. The wood's heavy thud echoed in my ears as a strange mix of freedom and pain filled me. A bittersweet reality. The next morning, I saw a message on my phone. It was from Karen. The cold, calculating woman I knew had written in a different tone. "Eleanor, we can talk. For the kids. Please." I held the phone, sensing her anger, desperation, even a hint of fear behind the words. But I didn't reply. I knew now, they had always seen my silence as weakness. Every time I stayed quiet, they walked over me. But silence was my greatest strength. Silence was the shield that freed me. That evening, sitting in my room, I picked up the phone and called Thomas. His voice answered after a few rings. "Eleanor? Everything okay?" "Yes," I said, calm but resolute. "But I need to ask you something. What should I do with the money from the land sale?" A brief silence, then Thomas replied thoughtfully, "That's your choice. You could buy a house, build your own home. Or start a charity, be hope for others. It's up to you, Eleanor." My eyes drifted to the window, to the lights shining after the rain. A warmth I hadn't felt in years filled my heart. "A house," I said, smiling. "But this time, just for me. A place I don't have to share, where my own voice echoes." When I hung up, my resolve grew stronger. I had broken the chains of the past. Every step I took from now on would be mine. A month later, I bought a small house by a lake, a bit outside Austin's bustle. Driving down the winding road, the view that greeted me felt like opening a new page in my heart. The house wasn't grand, whitewashed, single-story, its wooden porch facing the lake. The garden had a few rose saplings, a small stone path, and empty soil. But in that simplicity lay what I'd long sought, peace. I'll never forget my first morning. At dawn, I stepped barefoot onto the porch. Holding a warm coffee mug, I watched thin mist dance over the lake. The water sparkled in the morning light. Birds sang, the breeze was gentle. For the first time in years, my heart beat calmly. There was still no word from Stephen or Karen. My phone had been silent for days. But this silence no longer hurt. It was a shield protecting what was mine. In that house, I found my strength. I was no longer living for their approval. When I moved in, I brought a few of David's things. In the living room corner, I placed a photo of him smiling on the porch. Its colors were faded, but his eyes' light was still alive. I draped a blanket I'd knitted during his chemotherapy days over a chair, each stitch carrying tears and hope. And a small wooden box, holding the house deed, David's letters, and years of memories. That box didn't just hold my past, it held my story. Each time I opened it, I reminded myself, from all this ruin, I still emerged. Days passed like this, and one evening, I bought myself something new, a small digital voice recorder. I placed it on the table, turned on its light, and took a deep breath. I began to speak. If you've been abandoned by someone you love, know that you're not alone. My voice didn't tremble. I was no longer hiding my story. I had found the courage to share it. Silence isn't defeat. Silence is the moment you gather your strength. Silence is the first sign of a new beginning. When I finished recording, my heart was racing. I didn't fully know what I was doing, but something inside whispered, share. This is your path. I transferred the recording to my computer, made minor edits, and uploaded it to my channel, Grandma True Storytime. I'll admit, I didn't expect anyone to listen. But within days, notifications started coming in. I went through the same thing, one woman wrote. I found myself in your words. Another said, thank you. I heard my own voice. Each comment added warmth to my heart. Realizing I wasn't alone was as empowering as making others feel they weren't alone. Perhaps this house wasn't just a home for me. Through my story, it was opening a door of hope for others. In that moment, I understood, I hadn't just survived. I had become a story that could guide others. After uploading the recording, something unexpected happened. Comments didn't trickle in, they flooded like a river. First, a few women shared their stories, those abandoned by spouses, forgotten by children, excluded by families. Then grandmothers wrote, followed by younger women. They all shared one thing, they'd carried the same pain in their hearts but had also found the strength to rise from their ashes. Silence was no longer a sign of loneliness. It had become a chorus. Their stories blended with mine, growing louder. I was no longer sitting alone on my lakeside porch. As I sipped my coffee, hundreds of voices joined me. Whispers merged, echoing, forming a powerful melody. This melody reminded me of a letter David wrote years ago. You were the heart of this family, Eleanor. He was right. But I hadn't lived to be their heart. Now, I was rebuilding my own. One day, a message came from Stephen, Mom, can we talk? I stared at the screen for a long time. A fleeting ripple stirred within me. In the past, I would have called him immediately, desperate to hear his voice. But this time, my fingers didn't move. There was nothing left to say. They had never seen the meaning behind my silence. But others had. Strangers' comments, messages, and shared stories had turned my silence into words. One afternoon, sitting on the porch, a new desire awoke in me, to rebuild my garden. The next day, I bought flower saplings, especially lavenders, David's favorite scent. I set aside a corner of the garden for them. I dug the soil with my hands, carefully placing the roots. My hands were covered in dirt, but my heart felt cleaner than it had in years. Every morning, as I took my coffee to the porch, the lavender scent mingled with the lake, gifting me a peaceful day. My phone rarely rang. Once, that would have unsettled me. I'd believed silence was proof of rejection. But now, this silence was mine, my choice. And in that choice, there was no fear, only peace. Grandma True Storytime became a new life born from my silence. Each recording I uploaded helped another woman break her silence. People responded to each other's comments, leaving messages of support. Women who'd never met were leaning on each other, as if sitting at the same table. I realized I hadn't just created a channel. I had birthed a community, And this community would be my greatest legacy. At the end of the day, I wrote in my journal. I, Eleanor Davis, a mother, a grandmother, a widowed woman, learned to speak through my silence. And now that silence has become the voice of thousands of women. I didn't touch the money from the land sale for a long time. Looking at my bank account reminded me of David, the memories he'd built over years. But one day, sitting on the porch, staring at the lake's quiet surface, an idea was born. This money shouldn't just be for my peace, it should help others rise again. So, I founded the Silent Strength Fund. Its purpose was simple: to support women and grandmothers who'd been abandoned, forgotten, or left alone. It would be a breath, a hope, for them to rewrite their stories. My first donation, with the purest intent, was for Mia and Lucas. Contributing to their future reminded me of David's smile. But I didn't give a cent to Stephen or Karen. Because a legacy wasn't just about blood, it was about understanding, heart, and loyalty. The fund grew faster than I expected within months. As women shared their stories, others saw, heard, and supported them. Small donations merged into a massive wave. It was no longer just my story, thousands of women's silences had come together to form a movement. One evening, sitting among the lavender scent on the porch, a message came to my phone. It was from a woman I didn't know. It read, "Your story saved me. I was abandoned, lost myself. But I listened to you, and I stood up again. Thank you." Tears streamed down my face. But this time, they weren't from pain, they were from profound joy. I understood that my silence wasn't just my refuge, it had become hope for others. David's legacy wasn't just land or a box of papers. His true legacy was the patience, resilience, and heart he taught me. I had taken that legacy and turned it into my strength. Stephen and Karen had recently moved to a new apartment. Our paths rarely crossed anymore. Still, I saw Mia and Lucas a few times. Brief visits, but precious. I hugged them tightly, breathing in their scent. The wound that had bled in me for years had finally scarred over. I had left the past behind. I had a future now. Every morning, I walked barefoot in my lavender garden, listening to the hum of bees among the flowers. Every evening, I heard the lake's voice, the wind speaking to the branches. And every new day, another story uploaded to Grandma True Storytime broke another woman's silence. I, Eleanor Davis, was no longer just a widowed woman or an abandoned mother. I was a story proving silence could become strength. And that story had become a legacy far greater than myself. A year passed. In my lakeside home, I woke each morning breathing in the lavender scent. My garden had grown, colorful flowers sparkled like a painting reflecting the lake in the dawn's light. There was no more rushing to make coffee or handle chores. I took a deep breath, returning to myself in the lake's silence. This silence was no longer emptiness, it was strength. Grandma True Storytime had become far more than I'd imagined. Women shared their stories of exclusion, betrayal, loss, but each held a spark of hope. One woman's voice guided another, helping them break their silence. Some expressed long-suppressed anger, others rebuilt their lives. Every comment, every message, was a small but powerful victory. Sometimes, messages came from Stephen and Karen, "Mom, can we talk?" But I no longer replied. There was nothing to say, my silence was now a strength, a boundary, a reminder. They had mistaken it for weakness, but true weakness is denying your own worth. I had built my justice with silence. At the end of the year, seeing the impact of the Silent Strength Fund filled me with indescribable joy. Women, grandmothers, those left alone, each reshaped their lives with the fund's support, finding hope with a small boost of confidence. There were no grand ceremonies, no shouting anger, no cries of revenge. Here, justice spoke quietly, with slow, deep impact. I, Eleanor Davis, a mother, a grandmother, a widowed woman, had taken control of my life. My silence had become the voice not just of my story but of many women's stories. The wounds of the past were now memories to recall, not control. Sitting on the porch each morning, watching the lake with a cup of tea and the scent of lavender around me, I felt the justice of silence. And I knew this silence spoke in its own time, a strength and a beacon of hope for all. When people don't chase revenge, justice happens, sometimes in a glance, sometimes in a story, sometimes beside a cup of tea. This silent justice echoed in the lake's reflection, the wind's hum, and every woman claiming her life. Every story, every comment, every donation, every silent step, these had made Eleanor Davis's silence a resounding strength. And I was no longer living in the shadows of the past, I was multiplying my light and that of others. Silence was justice itself.